Now, some interviews are just fun to do, and this was one of them. You'll see a lot of laughter between two good friends. And I want you to get ready to observe a man who is a walking example of perseverance, and one whose perseverance resulted in his having a career doing what he absolutely loved to do and doing what he always wanted to do. Now, you only need to watch his expression when he talks about his first landing on an aircraft carrier to see what I mean. Now, I've known Rick Wolfe for years, and I'm delighted to introduce him to you. So let's ease over in the studio and introduce him to you. Well, we are in my wife's studio in the presence of one Richard Rick Wolfe, whom we have known for a lot of years, and this is not his first trip out to Richie's Roost in Chaco, Mississippi, I can tell you.
That's true.
Welcome, Rick.
Thank you.
Glad you're here, man.
I'm glad to be here.
We're going to start back, if it's okay with you. Where are you originally from?
Well, I was born in New Orleans. My parents were living in New Orleans when I was born.
Oh.
My dad had just gotten out of the Army, and he took a job with Submarine Signal Company in New Orleans. Sounds like a good Army transition, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But he was early into radars and consequently sonar and stuff like that. He was into all kinds of antennas and things like that. Took that job down there, and my brother he's 4 years older than me. He was already born before they moved there. He was born in Kansas City, I think. And that's where we were when I was born.
Yeah, but you don't sound like you were from Mississippi to start with. Now,
or
where
New
were you
Orleans,
raised?
yeah. No, they were, when I was actually born in Ohio because my mother went home to be with her family when I was born because my dad was traveling a lot doing stuff. And that was home for both of them, Southern Ohio. I was born in Gallipolis, Ohio, on the Ohio River, right across from West Virginia. And they lived in Racine and Middleport, Ohio, a couple of different places. My dad lived in Racine, my mom, Racine and Middleport. And so when Submarine Signal Corporation was sold to Raytheon, and Raytheon wanted him to be on the Great Lakes working with the freighters and stuff, doing radars and radio telephone stuff and all that sort of stuff. So they moved then to Conneaut. That was my first domicile in Ohio was in Conneaut, Ohio. And that's over by Erie, Pennsylvania, right along the border. And then we moved into the Cleveland area, and that's where he worked out of for a long time, and that's where I grew up in Olmsted Falls, Ohio.
All right. Well, that takes care of that mystery then. Go. Now, where'd you go to college?
I went to college at Kent State University.
Kent State.
Yeah.
Were you up there when they had the problem?
Well, they've had a lot of problems.
I mean that National Guard
I caused
problem.
some of them.
That shooting problem.
That was the next year. That was my sister's freshman year there.
Wow.
And ironically, I had been on campus just 2 weeks before that. I went up to visit my family and went down to see her at Kent. And she was having a grand time until the shootings happened.
Wow.
They shut the school down, and my sister went to tour Europe, backpacking around Europe. Back in the days when there was no cell phones and no communication was difficult. But she came back healthy, happy, and wise, and is doing great.
Wonderful. Were you in the Navy ROTC there, or how did you get in the Navy?
I got in the Navy by virtue of divine providence. I knew I wanted to fly, and I had interviewed at United Airlines, who had a domicile in Cleveland, and I had an uncle that had flown at United, and that was part of why I was interested in flying, and we were right on the flight path to Cleveland Hopkins. I mean, like we were about a half a mile from the inner marker.
Wow.
So it was, they'd fly overhead and they were low. And I loved it. But then I started flying in college and took aerospace course. I was in the aerospace technology courses at Kent State and learned to fly at Kent. I got my private, commercial, and instrument rating at Kent. And I was, trying to find a job with an airline. I didn't think Vietnam was going to last forever or as long as it was lasting. But so I looked around for, airline opportunities, and they would say, you got a high draft, you're high probability of being drafted. We can't protect that, so you probably need to get your military time in. Besides that, military guys are getting out now, and they've got more time than you do. So I looked around, and I was trying to get into the Ohio Air National Guard. They were flying F-100s out of Columbus, Ohio, but at the time, they were in Korea for the Pueblo apprehension. When they took, they captured, the Koreans captured the Pueblo, and the U.S. response was, to increase the military there. And one of the increases was they sent that squadron of F-100s over to Seoul. And that sounded fine to me because I knew you wouldn't be there long. And I took the test, I took the physical, and I passed everything. But they said, this takes a while. This is political in the Air National Guard world. So I said, okay. And they said, you better get a second option because after you graduate from college here, you're going to be drafted again. I'd already been drafted once in my summer after my freshman year. They said that I didn't take enough hours, and I said, whoa. So they said, well, you go back to summer school, or you can go to the draft. I said, I'm going to summer school.
Yeah.
So that worked out fine. And now I was looking at a draft again. And so I applied to the Navy and I applied to the Air Force. And the Air Force was, affiliated with the Air National Guard anyhow. So they looked at all my tests and everything, and they said, sure, we want you. You just have to sign in by like June 18th. And I said, mm-hmm. And the Navy, I had, they didn't use the same test and everything, but they said, if you sign in by June 28th, we'll take you. And I said, okay, thank you. So I went back and waited on the Air National Guard, and they didn't call, and they didn't call. And so my deadline for the Navy was on a Friday, and I waited to the last day of Friday. I said, okay. And it was, the swearing in was done in Detroit, was the closest naval air station. So I flew up to Detroit, and I got sworn in the Navy to start flight school, AOCS, Aviation Officer Candidate School, in Pensacola, on September 10th, 1969. And
well, let me ask you a quick question.
Sure.
Pensacola, you brought that up.
Mm-hmm.
Our son was a flight surgeon in the Navy.
Right.
And all the flight surgeons had to take flying. Now, he had to get his training in a plane in Pensacola, which he loved.
Yeah.
But he was not in a jet.
Well, they had at Pensacola, they only had T-34s, which was primary training, which was basically a Beach Bonanza.
Yeah.
But it was a straight tail, it was not the V-tail.
Right.
And then they also had T-28s there. And T-28s are a formidable airplane. And they're, it's a tandem arrangement, front and back, and a big radial engine that if you weren't prepared for what it was going to do when it did it, it could hurt you.
Well, I'll tell you, now I owned a Beechcraft Bonanza one time. It was a V-tail,
Right.
four-seater.
Uh-huh.
But it was too much airplane for me. I never was comfortable in that plane. So we sold it. I was in it with two other guys. And I will get into that a little later because that ties in with a couple of questions I got to ask.
The
But anyway,
T-34 was a Bonanza that was a tandem. It was a little narrow fuselage,
yeah.
and it was for that kind of airplane. It was great. I
Well,
mean, it was.
he loved it. Now,
Yeah.
he would have given up that medical degree if it had kept him afloat. But he had to wear glasses. I asked him if that medical degree would hold him back if he could get rid of the glasses. He said probably would. He said
Yeah.
I'd get out in a minute. But anyway, that's another story.
Yeah.
Well, now you were in the Navy for how long?
Active duty, not very long. I started on September 10th. Did start off as an enlisted guy in aviation officer training school, so that you're not commissioned if you wash out beforehand.
Right.
So, and I finished that. I got commissioned on Friday the 13th, February of
Oh, that's
1970.
wonderful.
Lucky day.
Okay.
And it was good. And then I got out of the Navy on January 1st of 1975. So it was only 4.5 years, something like that.
But you were on
5
active
years.
duty for 4 years, 4.5, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
And then I flew in the reserves for another 6 years. So,
but during that 4 years, you were landing on on carriers
oh yeah,
and so on.
yeah.
Well, before we get into all of that, there's a young lady that has had some bearing on you. Where did you meet Carlisle, your bride?
Oh, you ask a tricky question now. We do not remember either one of us actually meeting. Although
Rick, I don't believe I'd have told that.
she'll say it too.
You really impressed her. Huh?
Yeah, I did. It was we lived in this same apartment complex in Jacksonville at that time, and right across the pool, her apartment and our apartment was just right across. I had two roommates with me. She had one who was Tish Rayner from Yazoo City. They graduated from MSCW, and I swear, all these fathers in Mississippi were sending their girls down to Navy bases and Air Force bases and stuff.
Trying to get their MRS
Trying to find
degree.
a husband, yeah.
Well, what was she doing? What did she do?
She was
now?
teaching school.
Oh, I see.
She was a special ed teacher. She was in the first class to graduate in special ed from MSCW.
That's Mississippi College for Women.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And she interviewed in Jacksonville, and they had a new program that was a highly rated program. As a matter of fact, the director of the program at the school that she went to in Jacksonville, Mrs. Zando from New York, and she was she was strict, but she just fell in love with Carlisle for what her enthusiasm for doing the job and everything. The only thing she made her commute with one of the other girls that taught there was Carlisle taught on the other side of the St. Johns River. She didn't, at that point, she resided where all the Navy men were, but worked on the other side of the river. So she commuted with this girl from Indiana so that she could learn to speak English, is what the New Yorker said.
Oh, man. From Canton, Mississippi.
Right. So when she finished that year of commuting with this girl, everybody asked her if she was from Indiana, where the other girl was from.
Oh, man. Well, what kind of planes did you fly while you were in the Navy?
Well, I started off flying in the T-34, the primary trainer, which was a fun airplane. You go up and you do spins and rolls and...
Quit kicking the tripod.
Trying to make myself look better. Did it work?
No.
I was getting a rudder in there, actually. So you could even do inverted spins in that thing. I mean, there was instructors that racked up 100 inverted spins or something like that. Just crazy stuff, because it was a fun airplane, very safe airplane to fly. And did that. It was not a whole lot of flight time. I can't remember, it seems like it was like 18 hours of flight time. And then they say, okay, you can do this. We're going to move you on to either three pipelines. You can go to the helicopter pipeline, you go to the prop pipeline, which is where you went to T-28s, or you go to the jet pipeline, which is where you had to go if you were going to fighters and all that stuff. So they'd send you to Meridian then, and you'd fly T-2s out of Meridian. And that's where I went. So I took my newly purchased Corvette from Pensacola Buggy Works and took off for Meridian.
Jet pilots drive
Jet pilot,
Corvettes.
yes, that's right.
Okay.
I didn't have much life expectancy, but
Well, speaking of, do you remember the first landing you made on a carrier?
oh yeah, I do. It was great. It was fun. The practice you did for that was they had specific airfields that were not real long. I mean, they were long enough to land if you needed to, but it was all set up to mock a carrier, landing zone. And you'd had the Fresnel lens out there, which would tell you whether you were on glide slope or center line, and all that. And so you come down, and they have LSOs out there observing you and calling, what you needed to do to be right on the profile to land. And you go through that for, I don't remember how many hours of that, how many landings. It was a lot of landing because that's all you did, a short pattern, just go around the land. And then I went out to the carrier. Now this is just strictly day landings, and nobody flies with you when you go to for your first landing. Instructors just weren't that dumb.
I don't blame them.
Yeah, I don't either.
My first landings just on a regular airfield, my instructor classified as controlled crashes.
Right.
So
yeah,
I can understand why they'd be a little hesitant about getting.
So I remember going out and there was, we had a class of guys that were there for, you'd leave Meridian, you go to Pensacola for 2 months. I'm trying to think because those were two of the best months of my life. We went to Pensacola right after Labor Day and stayed there till Thanksgiving. And so it was, September, October, November. And you were flying a new airplane, which was a twin engine T2. Prior to that, we'd just been flying a single engine. But first we did air-to-air gunnery, where you go up and they'd have an airplane flying along, towing a banner behind it. And you learn to get up on the perch and roll down on the banner and shoot at it. And everybody in your flight had different color paint on their bullets so that you could see what had hit, who got the hits and where. And that was incredible fun. And then you'd start into the carrier landing practice phase of it. And we did that. I don't remember how many hours or whatever it was, but then we went out and landed on the carrier. And I was in one of the early groups that went out to land. And when I came back, one of my friends was getting ready to go out, and he was a little nervous. I could see. I was a little nervous before I went out myself, but after I did it, I thought, wow, that was fun. I mean, we didn't do but 4 landings or something like that. And then, you do 4 landings, you don't even shut it down. You just land. They tell you
touch and go.
No, these were not. You don't do touch and goes on the carrier often. Although there are sometimes you do, but because if you don't trap, that doesn't classify as a landing really. So you trap, you get the hook up, taxi over, and they put you on a catapult to take off for your next one. And you only have to do that like 4 times though for that initial qualification. And I did that, and I came back, and I was just so adrenaline high on it. I came back into the pattern, and would land and everything. And then there was guys waiting for the airplanes to go out and do their turn. And a friend of mine was coming out, and he says, "Well, how was it?" I can't lie, it was great. If you want me to do it for you, I will. He said, oh. so that part of it was over. Then, unfortunately, had to leave Pensacola, and my orders were then to Beeville, Texas, to fly TF-9s, which was just the old F-9 Korean War fighter, and turned into a trainer. It was nicknamed the Grumman's Lead Sled.
Lead sled.
I did it again, didn't I? Put that rudder.
I'm gonna cut your salary if you do that again.
Just put me into the
I'm
spin.
sorry. He's kicking the tripod.
Put me into the spin.
My operator license is not in danger because he's doing it. Well, were you married at that time?
Oh, heavens no.
You're still wild and single, huh?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh man, a jet pilot in a Corvette
And
in
I
the Navy,
didn't have my wings yet.
uninhindered.
Yeah,
Oh.
well, and I went to Meridian, Mississippi, where the base was way up from town, and we were obviously not the most highly sought after men in Meridian, because they knew we weren't going to be there but a minute, and I don't even know if I had a date in Meridian. Yeah, I had a few dates in Meridian.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Well, when did you land? There's a difference in landing in daylight in good weather and landing at night on a pitching deck.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, big difference. You're
Right.
right. You don't even get to the nighttime landings until you get assigned to a fleet-based carrier. Like, if you go, you get your wings with daytime landings on carriers. If you in another, like I landed on the F-9 on the carrier, and the F-9 was a tremendously sluggish airplane, and it was a little tricky because it didn't have a good response. You had to have the power up when you touched the deck, or if you didn't catch a wire, you're likely not going to get above sea level. So it was a little tricky that way, but it was a stable airplane, good stable airplane, and it was fun to fly. I had a friend of mine, as a matter of fact, in carrier landing practices down in Beeville, Texas, at one of the little outlying fields where we did the nighttime carrier landing practices. They picked this place because it's as dark as it can get. There's no lights around. The only thing you have is the sky. And on a cloudy night, you're flying around. You don't have any idea other than what your instruments are telling you until you pick up where the ball is that you're, where you're supposed to be. And as he was flying his downwind leg, he just looking over that way to see where the thing was, and it kept getting lower and lower until, bam, crashed it. But he had his gear down, everything was ready to land, and it's nothing but mesquite and tumbleweed and that stuff. So he rolls out and it stops, and he jumps out of the airplane, and he goes, "Oh damn, I forgot to turn the battery off." So he turns the battery off. That airplane was flying again within a month. The lead sled could take it.
War stories, huh?
Yeah.
Well, but you did finally land at night.
Oh yeah, I did that in the A7. When I went to what they called Replacement Air Group out of Jacksonville, and there's another big story. This is one that proves that the little decisions you make in your life are sometimes the biggest. And this one was, I'd got my wings in Beeville, Texas, and I had my orders were to Lemoore, California, which was A7 Replacement Air Group in California for the West Coast. And another guy in my class, well, it wasn't really in my class because he was in a different squadron, but he care qualified the same time I did, and his orders were to Jacksonville. And several of my friends had orders to Jacksonville too that had care qualified right before me. And he asked me, because he was from Central California, he said, "Would you mind trading orders with me? And I thought it didn't take me but a second or two, and I thought, I've been to Lemoore. That's inland California. That's more desert than I was in Beeville. Not real fond of the desert. I said, sure. And so we, presented it to the powers that be, and they said, one body's as good as the next one. Go ahead. And we did that. And so I go to Jacksonville, Florida, where I was then placed in the replacement air group that was providing A-7 pilots to, the 6 ships on the East Coast. There was 6 on the West, 6 on the East. All of them were going to Vietnam. Just, one would go to the Mediterranean for a while. And so as part of the training for the replacement air group, you have to do, this is the interesting part of this, is that it's a single seat, single engine airplane. There's no instructor in the back seat. For your first flight there's, for your first flight, they'd have a guy at the end of the runway watching. And that things happened faster in that airplane than they did in what I'd been flying. But it worked out great. I loved that airplane. It was a lot of fun. It was not a supersonic airplane unless you were going straight down.
But it is a jet.
Oh yeah, it was a jet. And it had a lot of technology that other airplanes that the Navy had at the time didn't have. And we had moving map display. We had a HUD. We had
what is a HUD?
Heads-up display where, like your gun sight, also has information of, your horizon and your, airspeed, altitude, all that stuff on there. Great instruments. And so I flew that from, when was that? 71. Well, until I got out of the reserves in 81. So, and
well, did you go to Vietnam?
No, I didn't. That's okay. Because when I traded orders, I wound up, and even then, I traded orders, and then I was going through the replacement air group, and they had 6 ships, which meant they had 12 squadrons over there that were, you could wind up in any one of them. And I wound up going to a squadron that was going to the USS Independence, which had just come back from Vietnam, but it was going in dry dock, needed some work done on it, and didn't know how long it was going to be. Didn't think it was going to be so long, but it was like 3 or 4 months in dry dock. And so we were doing these weapons tours, just weapons build-up things out to the West Coast. We'd go to Yuma, or no, it was just Yuma at the time. We'd go to Yuma, Arizona, which was a Marine Corps base, and they had a lot of targets out there, and it was right along the border, and so it was great fun flying out there. But
well, let's skip ahead considerably.
Okay.
After the Navy, then you did apply for a pilot's job in an airline, right?
When I got out of the Navy in January 1975, there were not airlines that were hiring at that time. That was, the economic cycles and everything. They had overhired right before that, and they were not hiring. And people were going back to college or going to brokerage firms. A lot of people went to New York to work for Merrill Lynch or something like that. And I was thinking that I would go back to Ohio and get in the Air National Guard that I tried to get into before. Because Carlisle and I had been dating for several years at this time. Of course, I was gone for most of that. But we weren't committed to marry at that point. And so when I said I thought I might go back to Ohio, because they'd just gotten A7s, and I was golden to them because I'd already passed their test, and I had A7 time, which nobody else there did, because the Air Force didn't have A7s until sometime after the Navy did. And she said, well, I really kind of think you ought to stay around here. That was the first encouragement I'd had from
In years.
yeah.
That's pretty bad, Rick.
Yes, it is. But I did, and I stayed, and I got in the reserves in Jacksonville, and I started in graduate school at the University of Florida, so that I went to Gainesville in civil engineering, and I was taking courses in traffic theory for highways and all the other modes of transportation that would come into the cities and stuff. And I was also studying the environmental engineering of the seaside stuff, construction along the coast, and did some interesting projects there. We did the first coastal construction setback line for rules on how close you could build to the water in certain environments, because it depends on how much of a slope there is down to the sea level and things. And traveled all over the state doing that. And Carlisle had a job before I did that. When I was away on cruise, she taught at the University of Florida. She'd got her master's degree at Florida State in Tallahassee, and then came back and taught at the University of Florida. Well, and then she went back to Jacksonville and was an assistant principal when I came back off a cruise. And that's when we both went back to Gainesville. She was teaching and I was a student. And we got married before that, but that was in March of '75, right after I got out of the Navy in January 1st, and we had decided that December to get married, and we drove from Jacksonville to Jackson or to Canton, and I hadn't asked her yet.
You just assumed?
Well, no, I just couldn't quite get those words out. And so, as we're driving up, passing Camp Shelby, I said, will you marry me? And she said, yes. And we didn't speak after that until we got to Canton.
Boy, that's really romantic, Rick. Okay, and she was a Canton girl, though.
She was born and raised there.
Yeah. So, well, then, so past that, what about the next? Stage?
Well, so while I was in engineering school, I was still, coveting those airline jobs and stuff. And so when some of the airlines started hiring, I would apply and stuff. And Braniff Airlines was, at the time, they had a real good balance sheet. They had a good route system. And they had a lot of flash and dash kind of things. They were painted all their airplanes all these fancy colors. They had
Braniff.
Yeah, all leather seats, and their flight attendants wore Halston uniforms and had fancy luggage and everything. And I was still trying to get on at Delta, but I didn't impress them enough, I guess. So I wound up going to Braniff. And well, actually, I could have gone to Southwest at that point too. But Carlisle and I talked about, we looked at it and said, Southwest didn't fly anywhere but in Texas at the time. And she said, I think you ought to go with the big boys. So I said, okay, I think it'd be more fun at Southwest, because they didn't even have flight engineers. The entry job at all the other airlines was a flight engineer. Not all the other airlines, but anybody that flew like 727s was the entry airplane usually. And so I went to Braniff and started off as a flight engineer. And
now, flight engineer, that's the third seat in the cockpit,
seat,
right?
Yeah, he does
you got
all
the pilot,
the systems.
The co-pilot, and
right.
The flight engineer sitting behind them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Correct. Sort of a non-flying position. But but just handling all the the systems, hydraulics, electrics, air, stuff like that. And but it was when I first went to them, they were a really good company. They had great new airplanes and new routes and stuff, and I can remember thinking this is going to be good. But we were based out of Memphis. It was a real small crew base, but it was the closest one to Mississippi. And when we had gotten married, she said, "I don't want to live in Ohio." And I said, "Okay, I really don't want to live in Mississippi either." And she said, "Okay." So we went to Memphis, pretty darn close to Mississippi. But we we were looking for a house, for a place to either buy or build a house or something like that in Memphis, and we couldn't quite find a place. So we were living in this apartment complex, and we didn't even unpack the boxes. Most of the boxes were just stuffed up against the wall. We had little Carla was born December before, and so she was just an infant while we were living there. But here we are getting reacquainted with ice storms and snow and everything and all that. And Carlisle's at home, and I'm on this sequence of trips, 3 4-day trips a month, or 4 4-day trips a month, which is, you look at that and originally you think that's terrible. You're flying 16 days a month. Most of the trips were 12 days a month. But the first day of the trip, there are 2 different trips. You'd alternate them. The first day of the trip, you'd go out to Salt Lake, and it was just like 2 legs to Salt Lake, and then you'd stay there until Monday morning when you'd leave. You get in there Friday evening and leave Monday morning. Well, you could go skiing on Saturday and Sunday and stuff, come back, and then the next weekend you'd wind up in West Palm Beach, and hotel was the Breakers right on the beach. This is when Breakers was kind of going down before they'd renovated it. But it was great. It was right on the beach, big swimming pool, all kinds of people and stuff. And I came home from there one time, and she was, in the apartment frying chicken for dinner when I walked in. And I walked into the kitchen, and she said, "Well, what'd you have for lunch?" I said, "Oh, we had Chateaubriand. It was the best thing." And she picked up a chicken leg with the tongs, and she said, "Don't ever tell me again." Okay.
They're that way, man. They will do that now. Well,
so that was the end of that.
So you're working with Braniff.
Yes, worked with Braniff until they went bankrupt, which was the first airline to go bankrupt. At that point, the Civil Aeronautics Board had been in charge of handling airlines that weren't, doing well, and they would split up their aircraft and their crews and other employees between other airlines and other places around the country. But when they did deregulation, bankruptcy meant they fold. So they parked all the airplanes, and everybody else was terminated. So I left Braniff. Well, actually, I got furloughed before I left. They were cutting back, and Carla was in the hospital in Memphis at that time. She was dealing with her Crohn's disease issues and had been in the hospital for about 4 months. And our little Carlisle I'd taken up to stay with my parents during that summer, and I was living in the hospital with her. It was closer. We bought a house in Oxford, and but when she went in the hospital, I didn't spend much time there, and so I got furloughed essentially while she was in the hospital, and then we went back to Oxford when she finally got out, and she was out for about a month and a half, and I was looking for jobs all over the world, flying, and I was driving down to the Ole Miss library to check on, there's more information.
Wait, why were you in Oxford?
That's where When we were living in Memphis and
Mm.
couldn't find a place to live,
Oh, I see.
we drove down to Oxford one time, and she said, "This looked good."
Yeah.
And I thought it looked good too. And it was. It was a nice place.
So that changed your mind about Mississippi then?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
So we moved to Oxford and made great friends, had a good time. But unfortunately, her health wasn't doing well. And so after she got out of the hospital, about a month and a half later, I was in a car accident. I was driving to the Old Miss Library to go through research jobs. And a young girl that had just gotten her driver's license that day pulled out, and boom, we hit head on. And I wound up losing my kneecap on my left leg. And I had a big old cast on ankle to hip, and went back to the same hospital to have the surgery and everything. And they, a lot of the staff there recognized us and said, "What are you doing back now? What are you doing?" It was somewhat funny.
Yes,
But,
if they had a
but
family plan. Huh?
yeah, but I got out of there, and then I was in that darn cast. I couldn't find, couldn't get a job. I lost my medical, couldn't. And then, so I took a job when I finally was able to get one in Jackson at South Central Bell. And they were very good to me. And I enjoyed the people there, working, still have friends from that encounter, but it wasn't flying. So when flying opportunity came up again, I left and went back to Braniff. They had started up again and recalled me, and so I went back, which was a mistake because they were not as good then as they were when they went bankrupt the first time. And they lasted, another couple, 3 years and went bankrupt again. So I'm back home again and went back to work at South Central Bell again. They were kind enough to rehire me. And then I got a job with Southwest, and that was the end of the, feast and famine thing. And Southwest was a wonderful airline. I still love them, and flew with them until I had to retire at age 60. And then 2 months later, they changed the retirement law to change it to age 65. But that didn't help me. I was already out, and the union rules were, once you're out, you're out.
Wow.
So I could go back and start at the bottom again, but we just opened a base in Las Vegas, and I would have been the bottom of the line first officer in Las Vegas, commuting, and I only had 5 years to do it in, less than 5 years by that time. So I stayed with the local business jet community. Did that for 13 years.
Well, explain that to us now, the local jet community.
Well, my first job there is I went to work for Jackson Air Charter, who was, I think, the only charter business in Jackson at the time.
Flying jet.
Yeah, flying jets. They had a Learjet and they had a Beechjet, and you did a dual thing. Flying Part 91 FAA rules means you're flying just corporate business stuff, but 135 is the charter business, and so we had to be Part 91 and Part 135 and do both of those kind of regulation things. And there wasn't a whole lot of charter done, but there was some charter done.
So, and then that lasted, what did you say, 13?
Well, I left there after 10 years. I thought I was ready to retire, and turns out I really wasn't. And so I took another job flying. I took a couple of charter jobs flying Learjets out of other places. I flew one out of Portland, Maine, and I flew one out of Guatemala, and did that for a little while. Then I took the job flying Beechjet.
Quick question that
Mm-hmm.
a lot of folks might be interested in. When you, what type of folks are flying these, are hiring a charter jet? these companies don't have a jet of
You
their own.
mean not the people that own the airplane and do
I mean the customers.
the customers that
Yeah.
would charter? Well, we had a lot of variety in that, but it was they're for the most part real nice people. They not most of them are not ultra rich or they would own their own, but they were wealthy enough that they could do that on occasion.
For example, if I wanted to just hire a jet right now to go out to San Francisco and come back,
that would probably cost you around $45,000.
oh,
Plus expenses for your crew that's out there with you. For now, like if you were going to stay for more than 4 or 5 days, the crew might leave you there and bring the airplane back, in which case you paid $45,000 anyway. And then they have whoever brings you back, either from out there and back, you get another $45,000 round trip dinged on you.
but if you got real travel to make, it makes sense to do that as opposed to trying to buy your own Learjet, right?
Oh yeah.
Because with the three of us out of that bonanza I was telling you about a while ago, and there are little things like annual inspections and all kinds of maintenance and
Oh yeah.
hangar costs and insurance and yada yada.
It is not cheap.
Yeah. So
It's not
so
cheap.
you pay for the convenience and you pay for the speed.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you have one or two flights that you remember that were real stories in that
In the charter business?
Yeah, you don't have to name any names.
Good. I think I told you part of one where went down to had a guy that was getting ready to go on a cruise out of Fort Lauderdale and he'd forgotten to take his medication and he decided it was easier to have it flown down to him than to get a prescription sent to a doctor or a pharmacy down there. So we flew his medication down to him so that he could get on his cruise. And that trip, if I remember right, cost like $28,000.
So he probably didn't forget to take them from then on. Right?
Probably not.
Oh,
And
okay.
I had another one where we went to pick somebody up that wanted to come back to Jackson for a funeral. And he was in Charleston or Savannah or someplace like that. And when we got there to pick him up, he had decided that he didn't want to go after all. And he'd already been checked in with the gals at the counter at the FBO, the fleet-based operator, which is there. Every airport has an FBO where the private jets come in and they get fuel and they handle the passengers and all that. And the gal there said, I told him this isn't like a taxi where you're not going to have to pay for it. You're going to have to pay for this anyhow. And he's not going. So he left when we got there. And when we walked in, she said, you're not going to believe what happened. So we turned around, flew back without him. But
with a check in your pocket. Huh?
no, we didn't get to handle the money.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, is there a law limit now, age that you can fly?
For airlines, it's 65 years old. That's Part 121. Now for 135 and for Part 91, you have to pass a flight physical and you have to pass a annual flight inspection, flight check.
But there's no age.
No age restrictions. Okay. Like NetJets, they've got pilots flying in their 80s, 85, something like that. Maybe one of the older ones.
Well, you are flying now, but you're not flying jets.
Not flying jets and not flying for money.
Not flying for money.
Yeah. And I'm fortunate to have a good friend that has an airplane that allows me to fly with him when he wants to go flying. And we've had some fun doing that. I really enjoy it. He's a good guy and the airplane's good. So it's a good relationship.
Well, we're glad you wound up in Canton and real glad you wound up in Canton with a good Canton gal. I'm glad, we converted you from a deadgum Yankee to somebody who really does like Mississippi. So we're delighted that you're here.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
We're gonna shut this down now, but I really appreciate you coming and sharing all that with us, Rick, and that'll be interesting to a whole lot of folks, I'm sure.
I hope you have a good editor.
Yeah. Well, no, we're not gonna cut and paste. Okay.
All right.
Thanks, man. Good to see
You're
you
welcome.
again.
Good to see you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed Rick's story as much as I did. Now, our plans are to introduce you to another interesting and very different story next week. And I'm Jim Ritchie, and I hope to see you then.